Hi, I'm Russ Camarda, an actor and independent filmmaker in New York, and in between the chances I get to do my own creative projects, I love to sit down with other artists and discuss how it is they do what they do. And that's sort of the goal for this podcast, the ACT podcast, Art, Craft, Truth. This time around, our conversation brings us to Jackie the Jokeman Martling. Now, you probably know him best as a writer and an in-studio comedian personality on the Howard Stern Show for many years, but Jackie's also a stand-up comic, an author, an actor, a radio and TV personality, and with a long and storied career, he's got fantastic tales to tell. Welcome to Jackie the Jokeman Martling. Some language or subject matter may be inappropriate or sensitive for some viewers and listeners.
This is me in podcast hell with Russ and Ed, and I'm about to tell them a horrible story.
No, not yet. Mr. Martling.
Well, I will start with saying that everything reminds me of a joke, and I just went in to use your bathroom, and I haven't thought of this in 60 years, but you have a sliding door.
Yes, right.
On your bathroom, and it went through my mind, oh, your mother's like a sliding door, no knobs. I was like, where'd that come from? And I love doing these because people say, yeah, thank you so much for doing my podcast or doing my show. And it's like, you're talking to a ham and you're asking him to talk about himself.
Right.
You know, I remember the first time I did a golf outing, I could never do them when I was on the Stern Show. But all of a sudden I had all this free time, and they have you come to a golf outing, and they pick you up in a limo, and you play golf with celebrities, and then they give you steak and lobster, and you tell a few jokes, and then they drop you off and say thank you. I'm like,
that's a good
you're
gig.
Thanking me, you know,
right.
like who do you know?
Right. Rather than go through, we'll hit some of the highlights and stuff, but I want to talk about the whole point of the show is I have no idea how you guys do what you do. Like, that's a totally alien comedian. I don't even understand that. That's a courage I don't even understand. So that's what I want to get into.
Well, you know, it's like asking a doctor, how are you a doctor? Like a gynecologist and a foot doctor and a kid doctor and a psychiatrist. They're all as different as anything can be. And comedy is different than acting. And what I do is different than comedy. But the whole basis of what you do and what I do, what we all do, the whole idea of standing in a room and looking the other way.
Yeah.
You're looking that way and they're looking at you.
Right.
You know.
Right.
It's dealing with people that are facing the other way. And I'm always amazed when you read about General Patton, or maybe not him so much, but a lot of generals, and they say that they would walk into battle and walk in the oncoming fire sooner than stand in front and address 100 people.
Right.
Because it's so terrifying,
yeah.
Which is like, I guess when we're hams, that's such an ugly word, but unfortunately it really fills the bill.
It is, and there's also some kind of adrenaline thing we get out of it. It's
you know, I started going to a therapist a long time. My ex-wife and I were in the course of breaking up. We didn't know what to do, and I wasn't happy, and I was like, I'm going to go to a therapist because I want to find out why me saying something to you or saying something to 1,000 people and making them laugh, why does that make me feel good?
Right.
So I went to her for 2 years, and we never did address that problem. I don't know what it is, and I don't think it's the same as an actor, because like an actor likes to get laughs, but they also like to get appreciated, and like you could, I guess, do a whole play and never make anybody laugh, and still it's
right.
Wonderful.
It's a different thing altogether. It's more about, I think for a lot of us, it's more about getting to something, which has got to be the same with comedy, getting to something truthful where you like
making a connection,
right. And they feel it. They felt that.
Right.
You know?
Right. Laughs are funny, especially now.
Yeah.
With the COVID
right.
and nobody's doing anything. I've been doing these cameo.com things, and it's like my methadone. Like I do a minute or 2, 3 minutes of jokes.
Get your fix.
And it's, I'm just making myself laugh.
Right.
And I'm talking to people, and then you get good reviews, and it feels great. But if I go into a delicatessen and I make the guy behind the counter laugh a couple times,
right.
that feels as good to me as doing well on stage. It's just something.
Yeah.
I don't think it's innate, but I don't know. God, it's so hard to put. It's like
Well,
it's like trying to nail down Mercury.
Well,
you
let's dig in a little bit. First, let's start with let's go back. I'll be your therapist today. Let's go back. So you're a Long Island guy, right? You were born and raised here, or no?
Born and raised in East Norwich, which is just south of Oyster Bay.
Did
and
they
now
always
I live in Bayville on Long Island Sound, which is just north of Oyster
Did
Bay.
they always call that East Norwich, or did they change that name? It was always East Norwich.
It was Norwich until 1850,
Right.
and then they realized there was a Norwich
Oh, right.
in northern New York.
It always sounds like it's somewhere else other than Long Island.
No, it's funny. It's funny, but it had to be East Norwich when they started assigning postal addresses.
So you grew up. You went to school here. Did you? When you were a kid, this is the cliche question, but were you the comedian in the class, or were you?
You know, it's funny because when I started doing comedy, that's of course, were you the class clown?
Sure.
And initially, I would kind of say no, because in my twisted comedy mind, who am I to bestow that honor upon myself, the class clown?
That's right.
You know,
Somebody else's.
And then meanwhile, my 8th grade class picture is the cover of my first comedy LP, and I'm sitting there giving the finger, and I said, you know, wait a minute, maybe by default I was the class clown.
That's right.
But I know in 3rd grade, the principal called me out of class, and it's a little scary. I went to a very small elementary school right down the street from my house, and it was a brand new school. It had just been built, and the school I originally went to, kindergarten through 2nd, was the same school my father went to. I mean, you know, it's a small town.
Right.
And the principal called me out of class in 3rd grade, and I'm like, what's going on? And she said, Jackie, I'd like you to be in a school play, you know. So I was in a play called A Bird's Christmas Carol, which was the story of a Christmas carol. I think the Birds was the name of the family. All I know is there was a girl in 8th grade named Becky Brown who was tall and blonde and beautiful.
This is how it always
with
starts.
long blonde hair. And I had to walk across the stage holding her hand. And
That's
all the
all
guys in 7th and 8th grade were like, wow, man, you get to hold Becky Brown's hand. And I'm like in 3rd grade going, what does that mean? You know. But what the things that come back to you are so funny. I didn't realize this, but when you back time and people ask you enough questions, you know, instead of going, I don't know, you know, when did you hear your first joke, all that stuff. I distinctly remember my first dirty joke hearing it. But I was in Cub Scouts. Were you ever a Cub Scout?
I was not, no.
Okay, well, I was in Cub Scouts, and in Cub Scouts they had a thing called the Blue and Gold Dinner.
Okay.
And once a year, the Cub Scout pack went to a semi-fancy restaurant,
Right.
the Cub Scout and his father, which must have been really comfortable for the guys that didn't have a father. But in those days, everybody had a father. Right. Nobody was divorced. And you'd go to Blue and Gold Dinner with your father, and they give out whatever kind of awards, but it was just like a bonding thing. And I was in 5th or 6th grade, and Mr. Bott was the guy who was kind of in charge. He wasn't the scoutmaster, wasn't the Cub master, but he was one of those guys that helped out a lot because 2 of his kids were Cub Scouts. And he said, I'd like you to be the MC of the Blue and Gold Dinner. I actually went home and asked my mother, what's MC? You know, and she thought it's Master of Ceremonies. And it's so funny. You know how things stick with you, okay?
Yeah, right.
I had to be the MC of this thing, and I had to stand at a podium.
Right.
I was so little. I grew like 6 or 7 inches between 7th and 8th grade. I was tiny and actually had to stand on a box behind the podium. To this day, if I walk up behind the podium, I'm like,
where's the
how
box?
great is this? I don't have to stand in a box. And I'm not exaggerating. It's still up there. So nobody said, be funny, be stupid. That you got to basically go up there and say, we will now salute the flag.
Right,
that was my job.
Right.
But I get the idea, like, I don't know what the actual thought process was, but it must have been along the lines of, here's a chance to break balls, okay? And there was a a magazine called Boy's Life that every Boy Scout and Cub
Yes,
Scout, you
right.
automatically got it in the mail if you were signed up as either of those things. And there was a page in every issue called Think and Grin, which were very, very bad, very clean, silly pun type jokes. And I don't think I was looking. I think I was reading the jokes and it hit me. I said, I could make this joke about Mr. Bott.
Okay.
So I actually took a joke and switched it like a comedy writer.
Oh, so you
like a comedy writer. And I took this joke. Not only that, it was the tiniest bit off color. It was kind of a dick joke. And I went up and I got up on my box and said, I was talking to Mr. Bott, and he told me he had a dream last night that he was skydiving, and he jumped out of the plane and pulled the ripcord, and when he got out of bed this morning, his pajamas fell down. And it got a big laugh. Nobody had asked me to do that.
Right.
I didn't clear it with anybody,
Right,
and
right.
I realized I did my first roast as a Cub Scout.
I was going to say, yeah,
you know,
you had a Friars roast at the Cub Scout
which
thing.
is so crazy.
That's
you know.
fucking phenomenal. That's inexplicable. Who knows where that comes from at the age of whatever.
My mother was very funny, and I recently bought a book that used to be lying around the house that I remembered so clearly that when I got it in the mail about a month ago, I remembered exactly the Little Willie rhymes that were very dirty, not dirty, but very nasty,
Sure.
off color. Willie setting fire to his sister and stuff like
Jesus
that.
Christ.
And it was pretty interesting. And she was not dirty, but she was really witty and
Right.
really smart. But that was your mother. So that's
Right.
all you know. You
Right.
don't know that that's not everybody's mother.
Right, right.
Like if my zipper was down, she would point and she'd go, "Ever ready, Eddie," which is very funny.
It
But
is.
that was
Not from your mother.
what my mother says,
Right.
And once when I was a little kid, like once in a while, you know how you could catch a little kid with the same joke,
Yes.
over and over,
Sure.
and. Once again, am I 2 years old? Am I 7 years old? I don't know. But I'd be like, "Mom, where are my shoes?" And she would say, "Do you know Helen Hunt?" I'd say, "No." And she'd say, "Well, go to Helen Hunt for them." But this is my mother talking to her 7-year-old. This is long
Right.
before there was an actress named Helen Hunt.
Right,
And when I
exactly,
told Howard Stern that, he was like, "Your mother said that?" I'm like, "Yeah, she was funny."
Wow, that's-
So maybe... Once again, maybe that instilled this whole thing in me,
Right.
but it was so ubiquitous.
Right.
I mean, does a fish know it's in water?
Yeah,
You know
no,
what I mean? I was
exactly.
surrounded by, everybody in my family is funnier than me. They're
that's-
all just really. I'm the little pig that, that built the house out of bricks because I
Right.
worked hard.
Right. Well, that's it, and that's a theme that's come up a lot with all these different artists I talk to. Is talent's one thing, but there's a tenacity that you have to have. And
Right. It's
if you don't have that, forget it. It's useless.
Edison said, 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration.
That's it.
It's
Yeah.
like it's all crazy.
So when you as you grow up, right now you're getting into high school, you're getting into young adult, man. Is this starting to come out where it's
No, what happened was, in summer of 8th grade, I think we were playing soccer or whatever, and a guy that I knew since kindergarten, who's still my best friend, 67 years later.
oh wow, that's awesome.
I realized I must have seen him playing guitar or something. And I said, "You play guitar?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "Well, that's really cool." And it's really funny because he went to Sunday school, and a girl in his Sunday school class, a cute girl in his Sunday school class, said, "Wow, Ricky Nelson's so cool. He plays the guitar." So this guy, Chris
That's it.
Bates, went out and got a guitar and started taking lessons. Never saw the girl again. She
Right.
never came back to Sunday school again. But now he's stuck playing the guitar,
Right.
and he says, "Listen, I could teach you 4 chords, and we could have a band."
Oh, wow.
And he was talking about C, A minor, F, G, a typical
Right.
dun, 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 teenager in love,
Sure.
et cetera,
Mhm.
et cetera.
Yep.
1, 4, 5, 1, 6 minor, 4, 5, however. So I'm like, wow, I'm in. We can meet girls. You know what I mean? Like
By the way,
Billy
that's-
Joel said 99% of guys start doing music so they can meet girls, and the other 1% are lying.
That's right.
You know?
By the way, that's another theme. Actor, it doesn't matter what art you're in. That's usually what the girl across the way is what usually
It's the
do.
hairy carrot.
That's no
the
question
hairy
about
carrot
it.
at the end of the stick. So, so we start playing, and we had a band in high school. We were playing instrumentals, and then one day I said, we got to sing. He said, we can't sing. I said, yeah, but we have to, or else this band makes no sense. So the next thing, we're doing oldies. But to us, oldies were Teenager in Love,
Sure.
Run Around Sue, Tossing and Turning. They were only 3 or 4 years old, but they were from way, way back in the 50s.
Right.
You know, it's like 62.
Right.
So we had a band for over 2 years before the Beatles hit.
Wow.
I mean, you know,
Right.
like, who are these new guys?
Right.
You know, the guys used to jibe me. I worked at Pipe and Rock Club as a busboy. And, of course, the British guys were like, oh, the Beatles, they can't even get on the plane. It's so crowded, Jackie. How's your band? You know, I'm like, fuck off, you know. So, and then the Beatles hit, and we loved them. And we actually, there were people that didn't like us because we played too much Beatles.
Okay.
Because they were too bouncy, the music, and
right,
it wasn't
right.
like Hold On, I'm Coming and,
Right.
and Knock on Wood. But I used to tell jokes. But we both did.
So part
Between
of
songs.
part of the set, part of the act was,
Well,
you know,
it wasn't really. It wasn't like we'll do this and then we'll tell a joke.
Right.
It was like we'd play a song and then the wild hair, like, look, all those people facing the wrong way.
right.
Maybe it's time to, you know. And of course, they tell a joke, and they were like, "What is he doing?" And then, of course, when I got to college, we had a full-blown rock and roll band. You know, Give Me
Wow.
Shelter and Smoke on the Water. And in between songs, I'm telling jokes, and people say, "Oh, the other guys like." No, the other guys hated it. They're
Right,
like,
right.
"What are you doing?" But you know, that was
Right.
that was the animal in there.
What did you go to college for? What was you
I
studying?
was a mechanical engineer.
Mechanical engineer. Why? What was the?
I graduated from Michigan State University in 1971 after 5 years as a
right.
mechanical engineer. My father had gone to Alabama University for 2 years as a mechanical engineer, and I just innately knew that if I didn't take a difficult major, I would get drunk and flunk out of college. So I purposely took a really difficult
Really hard.
major. I was in advanced math and
Did you think-
grammar school, and then no intention of ever.
So you didn't think this is?
No.
It was just to avoid getting drunk.
The last year of, after 4 years, I was short a year because I had lost a term because I had to drop out because I had to have my knee operated on after a wild drunk night, and I got my knee wrecked. And then I had failed enough classes that cost me a term over the course of time. And then 1969, turn on, drop out. I had literally dropped out because we all did. I was late 60s hippie.
Right.
But then in the summer of 1969 or 70, whichever it was, I met a girl, fell in love. What else am I going to do? We went back. She had just graduated, but we went back from Cape Cod to East Lansing, Michigan, and I went another year and graduated college. And but my last year of college, I'm in the engineering building with my dog and my ponytail, and meanwhile, guys are cheating off my paper. You know, it was like storybook.
Right.
But yeah, this guy's like, "Oh yeah, I'm interviewing with Ford, and I'm starting for 20 grand, and they give me a car, and I'm with General Motors, and I'm like." Not me. You know,
were you gonna
we're
do?
taking mechanics and atomic physics, and you know,
What were you gonna do? Did you have?
I wasn't going to get a job.
Were you still playing music?
I stayed in a college town for an extra. The college town's a bubble.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, it's wonderful and pot and booze and
Right.
my girlfriend and I broke up, and by the time the last 2 years, I had moved out to Lansing because I had no money, but it just was such a storybook town, and it was just so much fun. So I spent 7 years in this heavenly. It was Oz.
Right.
East Lansing was Oz. And then finally, I had too many skeletons in the closet for my old girlfriend, and one of my friends came and kidnapped me. Not kidnapped me, but he came to pick me up so we could go to Denver, and he wound up staying 6 months.
Wow.
And getting drunk for
There
6
you
months.
go.
And then we went on to Denver. But it was...
So a
And
fantastic.
then in Denver, I worked construction for 4 or 5 months, and I was like, this doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
And the guy who had taught me to play guitar in high school
Right.
And then we played summers between freshman and sophomore and junior years. We played on Long Island at some bars.
Okay.
And he was on his way to California, and he stopped in Denver, and he woke me up. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I don't know what I'm doing, but I can't play my guitar because I got calluses on my hand. I just started writing songs, and I can't play." He said, "I'll meet you back in New York, and we'll have a band." And I said, "Well, listen, I've been writing songs. I want to do original songs, and I want to tell jokes." And he said, "Okay." And we met back in Christmas of 1973, and we practiced till we had the magic 13 songs.
All right.
And then went auditioning, and we auditioned for like 5 places and got every job. And from 1974 to 1978, the Off-Hour Rockers played all over Long Island, traveling in a bright yellow 1955 Cadillac hearse.
Sweet. A hearse.
Yeah, I'll give you the pictures. You can
Oh,
show
my
them.
God.
We always had girls, we always had booze, we always had pot, and we never got stopped. They must have looked at that car and said they wouldn't dare.
Right.
But when we were in Denver, there was like 4 guys that lived in Denver, and then me and my friend JR showed up from East Lansing, and then 2 other guys from Oyster Bay. We had 8 guys from Oyster Bay, Long Island, living in a condo in Denver, and 4 of us were on the same construction form setting crew. And this poor 20-year-old foreman from Colorado, 4 guys from Long Island, you know, wise guy, ball breaking, Oyster Bay drunks. It was, you know, it was a movie. It was spectacular. And it was so much fun.
So you playing music? Is it paying your bills, or you working?
Well, initially we're living in my mother's basement.
Okay.
We were making some money, but when we were making money, we'd buy something to, you know, it was. It's just really, you know, I look back, my father had lost his job, and I have no idea how I don't know how the family existed, let alone with us we're living in the basement and bringing girls home. And I mean, it's just not a believable movie. I hardly talk about it because you had to have been there.
Yeah, right.
And then eventually we decided we got to get a place to live.
Gotta get out of the basement.
So my partner goes to real estate and says, "We want a house in Bayville on the water." And she's like, "Are you out of your mind?" He says, "Well, listen." She says, "You know, put us on the list." She said, "There's no list for a house on the water in Bayville." He says, "Well, put us on the list." So she puts us on the list. 2 weeks later, the woman calls. There were 4 girls from Queens that chipped in, were renting a home on the water in Bayville. One of them's parents were in a terrible car crash. She couldn't stay. She had to go home and take care of the family. Without her rent, the other 3 couldn't swing it. "Can we please get out of our lease?" And the woman was like, "Well, you guys," and we go to see this house. The 3 girls were there in bikinis. This is in the summer of 1976. They're in bikinis. And they're walking around, they're going up the stairs in front of us in bikinis, and they're showing us around the house. A couple of weeks later, when we moved in, we're like, "Oh, I didn't know there was a dining room. I didn't know there was a basement because we didn't see anything except the girl's ass." And we wound up in a house on the water, which is literally 2 houses away
from where you live,
from my home now.
That's amazing.
And the landlady lived in the garage behind us, she was an old woman, Madame New. She lived above the garage.
Madame New? What was she, the dragon lady?
Her last name was New,
Okay.
N-U. We call her Madame New.
Right.
And she pretty quickly hated us. And, you know, and then one of the big parties, she came over, and there's motorcycles on the lawn, and she came in, and she walked upstairs, and they were smoking pot in one room, and people getting laid in the other room. So she wanted us evicted. I had met 3 girls that lived around the corner, and one of the girls was dating a law student who was interning. One thing you got to understand, I never make stuff up.
No,
it sounds like I'm making it up as I go along. This guy, whatever his name was, Larry maybe, he was interning at the marshal's office in Mineola. So the marshal would go around evicting people.
Right.
And he kept putting our eviction notice at the bottom of the pile.
Oh, my.
We got an extra year and a half
Wow.
at the place. and it was just,
So you have you got a little, like a lot of the people I meet with this, you got a little angel on your shoulder.
you know,
I mean,
I got one, I got an angel, and then it gets
like,
popped off and it climbs back up and gets on like the fly on Pence's head, and then somebody knocks it off again. But it keeps climbing back up like a snail.
right.
And then I was like, someday I'm going to find my way back. That band broke up. And the craziness of it was one of the bars where we were working, I fell in love with a girl.
Of course you did.
When we're working at that, when we're living on the beach, and this girl was this beautiful school teacher, and so madly in love with her, and she really could have cared less about me. She liked me, and we fooled around, and we had a great time, but like, don't get too close. Well, that's all they have to say. And so the guy owns 2 clubs we're playing at, and we're packing the place. This place on Thursday, this place on Saturday. You can't move in the place. He's making a fortune, and they're all worried I'm going to kill myself. So he says, all right, you know what? We're going to make a record. And because we used to play a song called the Pot Song, and we used to get 5 encores. The end of the song was, roll up the reefer, we'll have some illegal fun. And the crowd would go nuts.
Right.
So he says, we'll make that into a record. And I said, I'll do it, but you got to let me do my love song that I wrote for this girl on the other side. They agreed.
All right.
And he said, all right, we're going to do it at Kevin's, because Kevin played in a band called Savoy Truffle that packed his place on 2 different nights.
Right.
The place in Massapequa and the place in East Meadow. We go to work. We go to record the song at the studio. I get very close to these guys. They see I'm smart, talented. And they ask me to come work with them. Almost for free. I think $5 a day. So I'm working at the studio and playing in the band. Eventually, I get thrown out of the band. My songs, my jokes. This is one of the great show business stories of all time. After we get done playing one night, we're in the dressing room, the room where they keep the cases of beer.
Right.
And they said, Jackie, Bates, my best friend, who's still my best friend, says, Jackie, me and Herbie are going to leave the band and start our own band. And I said, Bates, listen, you don't have to be a mechanical engineer to know that if there's 3 guys in a band
Right.
and 2 of them leave to start their own band, that's kicking me out of the band, okay? But at the time, we were doing mostly my songs. I was telling 99% of the jokes. It really was my show.
Sure.
And I kind of knew it was coming. So then I started playing just by myself, playing the guitar and telling my jokes. But I had been kind of segueing. I had been playing by myself here and there while the band was still playing. And I ran into some guys. I don't want to go to the whole thing, but I ran into guys that wound up going to Richard M. Dixon's, and the guys would come to my gigs. There was no place to get on stage on Long Island.
Sure.
Eddie Murphy, Bob Nelson, Rob Bartlett, they're coming and doing 5 minutes, 10 minutes on my stage.
This is the late 70s, mid 70s, late 70s?
1978.
78, right.
And that's right when the band broke up. And meanwhile, I went to work at that recording studio. Kevin and Jeffrey were the 2 owners. Kevin was the guy that played in the band at the same place as me. He is currently married to my sister.
Wow.
Like, I stick to people's feet like gum on their shoe.
No kidding. Yeah.
And then, when the band broke up, I didn't know what to do. I just knew every joke in the world because I got a good mind.
Well, we're going to get into that too, because that's the one remarkable thing about you more than anything else is this little steel trap.
But
fucking
the
memory.
whole thing about people say, why do you decide to be? There was no intention ever of being any kind of a comedian. Number one, I never thought it was an option. Like class clown.
Right.
You don't get to be a comedian. Somebody anoints you
Right.
to be a comedian. As silly as it is, when I went to Michigan State, and the second band I was in, the first band, we were so horrible, but it was great fun. But then we had an actual band.
Right.
And the drummer was this sweetheart guy, Nick Petrovich. He passed away. Not a good-looking man, and overweight. And we're talking, and what do you do? I took mechanical engineering. What do you do, Nick? He said, what's your major? He said, radio and TV. And I can remember how that hit me. Like, wait a minute. You don't just get to choose to be in radio and television. You know what I mean? That comes down through the ages or your parents. You don't say, you know what, I think, I'm
going to major in...
I'll be a president of the United States.
Right.
It never dawned on me that it was a learned thing, and you learn, there's different jobs besides Johnny Carson. Somebody's got to run the camera, somebody's got to book the show, as obvious as it was, but that was one of those light bulb moments, like, wow, But the idea of being like we listened to Robert Klein,
right?
We listened to that album, and I remember listening to Shelley Berman when I was like 7th grade.
Right.
But for the most part, we bought the Red Fox album so we could steal the jokes. And me and Bates were told, comedians do their jokes, the same jokes, to a different audience every night.
Right.
We had the same audience week after week after week. So we had different jokes every week, which is how I just amassed.
That makes total sense.
And I already knew every joke. In 1975, when you tell jokes, people know you tell jokes, everybody has a joke for you.
Right.
In 1975, we'd be playing at Neptune's, and we'd take a break, and somebody would come up to me at the bar and say, well, I got a joke for you. And I would say, all right, I'll count down from 10. By the time I get to 1, if I don't know the joke, I'll buy you a beer. I never bought anybody a beer.
Stumping the joke.
I knew, like if a guy told me a joke about an Indian and a cowboy walking along in the range, after 2 sentences, I realized, oh, this is the joke about the nun and the priest on the, I saw the parallel. I just, in the mid-70s, I already knew 99% of the jokes, and they just kept coming and coming and amassing, and I was up till all hours of the night, college, bars, drinking, partying, getting stoned. I listened and listened and listened, and the longer, the more the years went on, the more infrequent it was that I heard something I never heard before.
Wow.
But it was gold.
Sure.
And and there's so many jokes I remember, and I remember where I heard them, and I tell people, I should write a book just about how people would be flabbergasted, because then you back time how that possibly happened.
Yeah.
Like, what is it when you do it with the COVID, when you backtrack to see where it
contact tracing.
Contact tracing where the joke came from.
Right.
It's
well, what's amazing to me, because when I saw you live the one time I finally got to see you, it was 2 hours of joke, and what I want to ask you about the craft of it, of how you do what you do is, I mean, there's all different kinds of comics. There's the guys, they do bits, and there's observational, the Seinfeld type guys, and the...
I always tell people I'm not a comedian, I'm a joke teller.
Right. It's like, was Rodney a joke teller like that? He wasn't a bit guy,
I loved
right?
Rodney because he was punchline.
Yeah, he was just... Right.
But he wasn't telling old jokes. No. I tell old jokes. If you want to be a comedian, there's 2 things. The cardinal rules are there's 2 things you don't do.
Okay.
You don't tell old jokes, and you don't laugh at yourself. And that's all I do is tell old jokes and laugh at myself.
Right.
But it works, and it makes people feel good. And people are like, well, what do you... I'm like, I've never done anything in 40 years except stand in front of people and have a lot of people tell me that was the hardest I've ever laughed for an hour in my entire life.
Well, you know what it is, Jackie? It's the pace. It's that they come right on top of,
and just give people just enough time. It's just something I've always done. In the beginning, I started doing lines and talking about my family. I had some jokes. They were still jokes, but but lines that they were jokes about my family. But it wasn't like going on and on. It was like they
Yeah, they had a beginning, middle, and end real tight.
When I was a kid, my father used to pull me through the snow. I wish we had a sled. That kind of stuff. But then I realized just the jokes. The people just like the jokes, and I just did them. And they do stick. And
is there a like? Did you get better? Obviously, every craft as you do it longer. Do you get better at the vibe of the audience, timing it, feeling the energy of the room, or you just rip through what you got to do?
I do what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And I guess it, depending on the size of the room, it's it's kind of innate at a certain point. It's going to take a certain amount of time in the theater for it to get back there and the laugh to get back. It's so funny. The most blatant example is I went down to Zany's in Nashville, And I was doing pretty well at the time. And I did my show, and I didn't do that well. And I was like, wow, I guess they didn't like me that much. And I don't know, the bartender or waitress, somebody said, Jackie, they can't keep up with you. And I went up the next night and went noticeably slower.
You had to slow it down for Tennessee.
And did half as many jokes.
Wow.
And killed them.
That's incredible.
And it wasn't that they weren't smart.
It's
it was
just the pace.
That's not the pace of,
That's
We've all seen people from the city that talk way, way, way too fast.
Right.
And we're Long Islanders. Like, slow down, you know.
Right. Talking about playing the room, you've played tiny. Have you played the big arena type stuff? Like, what's the...
Not arena. I mean, I did
like, what's the big...
Westbury Music Fair
Okay.
and the Celebrity Theater in Phoenix.
What's it like playing those big ass rooms? Is it harder?
Well, like Westbury is funny because Westbury
That's in the
is
round.
big, but to me, the important thing is having people close.
Okay.
And if there's people close, you can play to them, and the rest of the crowd is just in on it. I don't like when there's a theater where there's room for an orchestra pit,
right.
or there's an orchestra pit. I always tell them, fill it in with seats,
right.
But you deal with it, you know. And some places are better than others, and some audiences are better than others. But for the most part, it's pretty much the same. You know.
Now, you said when you were a kid, you listened to Red Fox and
No,
Robert...
not until the 70s when we started doing jokes. You know,
Robert, but I mean, were the comedians that did the bit type stuff? What kind of stuff did you like?
What I listened to, my mother used to really enjoy watching me watch Red Skelton.
Okay, all right.
Because Red Skelton
Visual, yeah.
got such a kick out of himself, and he would tickle himself. He would laugh his ass off.
The crazy
And
hair,
years later, 1979, I'm in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So long ago, there was still a television in the comedy condo. And it was HBO, and it was either Red Skelton's 75th birthday or Red Skelton's 50 years in show. He's an old guy. And he comes out, and he's standing at the microphone and telling jokes and doing his act and laughing at himself. And the guys are like, Jesus Christ, Martling, that's you. And it was me.
Right.
You know, he's standing there, he's wiggling his arms and laughing, having the time of his life.
Right.
I mean, I don't mean to be flattering myself. I'm no Red Skelton, but it was like the same.
Right.
You know, this guy's, if they dropped a bubble around this guy, he'd still be having the time of his life.
Right, and I guess you soaked it up as a kid.
And then you find out later in life, here's the most relaxed guy who's having the time of his life. He would throw up. They would have to push him on stage because he had such stage fright.
Wow.
Red Skelton.
Well,
you can't wrap your brain around that because nobody looked more relaxed.
Did you ever have that kind of thing, or are you real comfortable always?
You know, very often people are like, oh, are you nervous before you go on? You're not nervous. You anticipate, and it gets worse because when people are paying a lot of money to see you, you can't just go out and make them laugh. You want to kill them,
right?
And you always know that a couple heckles, anything can happen. You know, anybody who says I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do great,
right.
that's the kiss of death.
Right.
You know that.
Yeah,
you don't
absolutely.
Do that, you know, it's like, wow, who knows? You know, the building could collapse, but so you anticipate. I don't think it's nervous.
Right.
It's a form of nervous, I guess.
Right. Now you're a live performer, and now you're in late 70s into the 80s. You're a live performer. Are you writing too? Are you writing jokes, or are you just
No.
Okay.
Well, I wrote some, but for the most part, I just tell old jokes. Like in the beginning of my comedy career, I was like writing jokes to fit me about my family or whatever, and then you wind up switching jokes. And if you're a student of jokes, which I am, you wind up realizing that there's very little new.
Right.
You know, like
it's just a play on a theme.
I was very good pen pals with this guy who was the joke collector of the ages, who was actually where I read my first version of the Aristocrats, and he was quoted in the movie, and they talked about him in the movie. But meanwhile, I'd been friends with him and had known about the Aristocrats joke 20 years.
Right.
20 years.
For people who don't know, that's the dirtiest joke that every comedian has to take a shot at some point.
Which is a little bit of horse crap
right
there.
Of course, but still, it's a myth of...
But it was so funny because this guy, Gershon Legman, once again, you can't make this up. I was so voracious about finding new jokes, and it gets harder and harder.
Yeah, I would think for
So
you
I'm
it's
going
impossible.
through and I'm reading a magazine or whatever it was, and the back, any 12 books, 99 cents. You know what I'm talking
Right,
about?
yeah.
And I see this thing, Rationale of the Dirty Joke. I'm like, well, that looks interesting. So I sent my 99 cents and got 10 books that who knows what they were. And I get this book that's this thick.
Holy shit.
The introduction is 30 pages. And this guy has collected jokes all over the world, but he's kind enough to put the jokes themselves in italics.
All right.
So I'm going through and I'm reading every joke I ever knew and then some. And I'm flabbergasted. This is like 1977, long before I'm a comedian. I'm looking for jokes for the off-hour rockers for Neptune's Pub. And at the end of his introduction, Gershon Legman, Val de Clamps, France, with the postal code. What do I got to lose?
Of course.
Just like I got in touch with Howard, just like I got in touch with Rodney. Blind letter.
This is the
Sir,
tenacity we're talking
blah,
about.
blah, 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 blah. And I said, you know, I love your book. I'm a comedian. I think I sent him, he's in France. Here's my cassette tapes of my act. Total ballsy.
Right.
I said, and it was a two-book series. Rationale of Dirty Joke was series 2. And number 1 was, whichever the two,
Right.
there was a first version, a first volume.
Okay.
And I said, for the life of me,
I can't
I cannot
find it.
find
Yeah,
this.
right.
This is long before any internet,
Right.
bookstores. I don't know what to do. A couple of weeks later, the guy writes back, I love your stuff. You're so funny, just amazing, your energy. I have 2 copies of the first series of my book. I don't need 2. I'll sell you one for $18. So I buy his copy.
Wow.
And this guy was so crazy that in the margins,
Right.
in pencil, are the corrections he's making for
Wow.
when the thing is reprinted, which of course it was never going
Right.
to be. And the opening says, to Jackie Martling, a great stand-up comedian from a sit-down comic and friend, Gershon Legman. And here is 20 years later, he's the hero of the Aristocrats.
Wow.
And so I'm reading, but this book's, it's like reading the Bible. It's so thick, and there's so much material
Right.
that you can only eat so much chocolate.
Right.
And at some point, I had heard the Aristocrats joke down in Florida,
Right.
and it buried me. And we all went wild. And I finally am reading the end of Legman's book. The first one is the cleaner dirty jokes, and the second one is the dirty, dirty jokes.
Right.
And the last joke on the last page of the dirty joke book is the Aristocrats.
Right.
And Gershon Legman's premise was, you're totally defined by what makes you laugh.
Okay.
And he says, the following joke was told to me by a magician who described it as his favorite joke. He was raised in horror in a family that battled constantly for 40 years, but the parents stayed together for the good of the children. He described my life.
Wow.
And then here's my favorite joke.
Wow.
I was like
Yeah.
awestruck.
That's it. The universe
and
spoke.
then when I did my dirty joke book in 1998, I put that joke in it,
Sure.
and it was the last joke on the
Right,
last page in homage to Gershon Legman. And when Penn Jillette and Paul Provenza decided they wanted to do the Aristocrats,
Right.
if you look at the list of people in that movie,
Yeah.
I don't belong in that list. I mean, it's every famous comic you've ever heard of.
Well, you'd be a
and
humble
Jackie
agent.
Martling.
Yeah,
you know
I
what I mean? And Provenza called me up and said, Martling, we have to put you in the movie because we did a search on the web of the Aristocrats. We only got 2 hits, and they were both your website.
Right.
Because on my website, I had Legman's version
Right. And yours.
and my version.
That's so fantastic.
And
That
my
is-
version is literally word for word almost the version that
that he-
Gilbert did.
Oh, that Gil.
Yeah.
Which
Not
is.
that, that, I mean, I'm sure I was the one that told him the joke 40 years ago, whatever.
Right.
Not that it matters,
Now, what is that community like? Before we get into the actually, I'll just go in order. Do you, when you're doing stand-up stuff, you got other guys on the bill too, or like what's the community of comedians like? Do
Well,
you
not
hang
anymore.
out with these
Not
guys, or
in the early days. It's funny because Robin Williams used to say, getting famous is great, but it sucks because I miss riding in the car. There was nothing better than the ride in the car.
right?
And I remember the first year or two of comedy better than I remember the last 38. The form setting in your mind of the whole thing. When I started, we were all scrambling. I was out of the band. The guys were coming and appearing with me once in a while. We were on Richard M. Dixon's, and he wasn't paying us. And, nobody knew what to do. And I'm living at my grandmother's. She had passed away. I'm living there with my girlfriend. And Richie Minervini, who wound up opening the East Side, he's been around forever. He's still a very close friend. He wound up opening for Kevin James, and he does his movies and stuff. So we're all not trying to one-up each other, but we're trying to put a shine on something. So he comes into my grandmother's house and he says, "Oh, Jackie, I was at Dangerfields tonight. I went on and did great. Rodney said, God, you're so good, kid. I'm going to put you on TV. I'm going to take care of you." And meanwhile, I'm like so jealous that my head's going to explode. Because here's Rodney's my favorite. And let alone he got on in New York City, like, holy Christ. So I sat down at the typewriter, and every joke that I knew or used, I took and switched to Rodney language. How Rodney would say it.
Okay.
How, from Rodney's point of view. 6 pages.
Wow.
Meanwhile, a couple weeks before that, I had been lying in bed, 3 or 4 in the morning. The phone rang, and my friend called me from Peru. And he said, "Jack, Chief, wake up. You gotta hear this. I just ran into this guy. So fucking funny, man. He told me this funniest fucking joke." And he kept me on the phone. He must have known I was drunk. And he wanted to make sure I remembered the phone call. And he told me a joke. And it was very funny. So I right away wrote it down. So in the 6 pages of jokes, that was one of the jokes.
Sure.
It was one of them. It didn't jump out at me, but it's a really funny joke. And I folded up and put him in an envelope, Rodney Dangerfield. Next time Richie walks in, I said, "Richie, do me a favor, give these to your friend Rodney." And he goes, "Oh, man." He says, "I didn't meet Rodney." He says, "He wasn't even there."
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, "You motherfucker."
You son of a bitch.
I sat down and wrote these jokes, but of course I typed them out with a carbon copy. I already have the jokes in the envelope. He goes, "But I was there. I swear to God I was there." And he has, out of his pocket, he takes a matchbook. Dangerfields with Rodney like this.
Oh, God.
1001 First Avenue. I just hand wrote
Wow.
the address and mailed it. What do I have to lose?
Right.
2 days later, I'm sitting there with my girlfriend in my grandmother's house. She's dead. Everybody she knows is dead. Nobody's got this number. The phone rings. "Hello? Hello. Who is this?" "It's Rodney." I said, "Rodney who?" "I knew you were fucking funny. I knew that right away." And Lois is like,
Wow.
"Who is it?" I said, "It's Rodney." She said, "No, who is it, Richie?" I said, "It's Rodney Dangerfield. Come on. Hey, there's a lot of funny stuff here. Some really fucking funny stuff. This Tennessee two-bagger is the funniest fucking thing I ever heard." And the joke that he really loved was this girl was so ugly she was known as a two-bagger. That's a girl so ugly, not only got to put a bag over her head, you got to put a bag over your own head in case her bag rips. So he went nuts for this joke. He said, "There's about 4 of these jokes I want to buy. Send you a check and
Wow.
why don't you come to Westbury Music Fair?" So he sends me a letter with the 4 jokes. I got copies of it. I'll send you to you. No, and $200, 4 jokes, and we went to see him at. This is like 1977 or something. This is before I'm a comic.
Right.
Like I don't have an album or anything like that. This is. This we're just starting out. This is 1978. We barely got our sea legs. And, I walk into his dressing room and, I got a ponytail down the middle of my back and I'm torn blue jeans and a beautiful young girlfriend. "Oh, she's beautiful. Hey, you want a piece of fruit? Hey, some funny fucking jokes. Well, look at the blue jeans with the fucking hair. What a fucking, she's pretty. Wow, you want some fruit?" But he was shot out of a fucking cannon. And we were like, I'm still there. So he buys the jokes, And then I badgered him for a couple of years to take me away with him. And then he finally took me with him to Lauderdale and Las Vegas. And it was...
He was notoriously generous, right? To all young comics. He was just a nice guy.
Like anybody. He was and he wasn't. You know, it depends on who you are. And you know, but he bought a lot of jokes for $50 a joke. and he was good about it, you know. And it was beyond exciting because this was my favorite guy.
Yeah, right.
You know, he wasn't just a comedian, and he wasn't just a successful comedian. He was my favorite guy because he was a punchline guy. Yeah. Like after he did Carson, we'd call each other up and quote the jokes back and forth.
Oh, that's so great.
And just fucking dying. And I mean, Carson went off his chair when he did the two-bagger joke. Oh, yeah. And, you know, later in life, he said, "Oh, that's the funniest fucking joke I ever had. How could I ever be pissed at you?"
That's so great, Jackie.
And it was nothing better. And it was always odd. Like down in Florida, I always went last because I was the dirtiest and the loudest. You know, it wasn't like in the beginning, there wasn't no headliner, middle, open. You know, it was like three guys. And then all of a sudden, the club owners realized, wait, we can get a local disc jockey to be the host of the show. And then he could talk about the comedy club on the radio. There was nothing funnier than watching a disc jockey host the show because these guys are on the radio. Right. So everybody they come in contact with is somebody they can help.
Right.
If you're Charlie that's selling cars and you're Henry that's selling roses, I'm the funniest guy in the world. I'm the greatest guy because I can only help you.
Right.
And to watch these guys get up there, number one, they have to be clean their whole lives. Right. And everybody thinks they're so entertaining. To watch them get up there and say fuck 100 times to a dead audience and just watch them realize nobody respected comics more than the local disc jockeys because they realize like this is no walk no walk in the park. This is, you know, you got to know what you're doing up there. You know, it gets real quiet real quick and dirty gets real dirty when it's real quick. You know, the whole thing. So it was always interesting. But then it was funny, and then all of a sudden it became headliner and middle act and all that. But that didn't exist. But
talk again about the car ride, the guys, the girls,
the camaraderie.
I mean, what was that? What's
well,
that?
In the beginning,
are you ripping each other? Are you telling jokes for each other?
Oh, you know, we laughed. You know, like, and I told old jokes, and I remember there was one time a guy got in the car with us, and it was our regular gang of guys, and one of the guys said, "Jackie, have you ever had an original thought in your life?" And I'll never forget Bob Woods. He's dead now. He said, "Pal, Martling never has to open his mouth again ever." You know, like, I mean, you know, because we all made each other laugh so hard and drank so much, and we were so out of control. But there wasn't the backbiting or competition or any of that because we were all so new.
Right.
You know, we met at Dixon's, and Dixon wouldn't pay us. So me and Richie Minervini started a show at Cinnamon which is upstairs at 25A and 25A and 110 in Huntington.
Oh, that used to be top of the town.
Yes,
and
that was Cinnamon. And it was owned by Jerry Cooney, the fighter.
Oh, the fighter, yeah, the heavyweight fighter.
His brother and another guy.
Right.
And we did a show there Tuesday nights that lasted for 12 years or something. But after a year or two, Richie and his brother branched off and opened the East Side Comedy Club. Oh, and then I got a call to do Governors. And that's where I don't know if you know, I got a dirty joke line, 516-922-WINE, which I created to help.
Wait, were you Dial a Joke?
Was not Dial Joke. I had my own Dial Joke.
Your own Dial Joke, right.
And I created it to promote our shows at Governors. I mean, at Cinnamon. And then the guys from Governors had a rock and roll club.
Yeah.
And they were going to get shut down by the neighbors because it was getting too loud. And somebody said, well, why don't we make a comedy club? And somebody said, why don't we call the guy with the dirty joke line?
Right.
Like they say, the rest is history. Me and Nancy went over there and said, all right, put the speakers here, put the stage here, give me a microphone and give me a phone. Right. You know.
Were there guys you watched that you just, like, who were the ones where you just fucking laughed every time?
Yeah, you don't laugh at other comics. You know, like
really?
I used to laugh at Otto. Bob Nelson made you laugh the first time.
Bob Nelson was he had the famous fact with the football player.
But he's so great, you know. Like, and Dave Hawthorne was, you know.
And you saw all these other kids coming up too, like the Eddie Murphys
it's so
and all
funny.
that stuff.
There was a place called the Rainy Night House in Queens, and they said, "Oh, there's this new guy," and he got up. And I said, "What's this guy doing? He's wasting his time. He hadn't got a funny bone in his body." And a month later, I saw the same guy. I don't know if he had changed what he was doing, or whether my taste changed, but all of a sudden, this guy was really, really funny. And it was Paul Reiser.
Wow.
You know, Otto and George were always funny, but only because it was so, the guy with the dirty dummy was so over the top outrageous. But it was always fun, and we all encouraged each other. And, you know, comics would laugh at what other people didn't laugh at.
Yeah,
You know, we're all what's the word? What's the German word? Schadenfreude.
Yes.
You know, you love to watch people.
Yes,
you know.
you want to see
like
a little
nobody
pain,
ever comes in and says, "Hey, Minervini's out there killing," or "Hey, Kelly Rogers is out there killing." "Hey, Woods is out there and he's really eating it," and you
Everybody's
couldn't get out there quick
right.
enough to watch. And if somebody's on stage and they're bombing,
Yep.
there's always like two distinct sounds. It's the guy tells this joke, and then it's quiet, and then it's the roar of the comics in the back to want to make sure that the guy on stage knows that they know that nobody laughed. I was with, this is one of my favorite stories. I was with Richard Jenny so long ago. I don't know if you know who he was.
Great comic.
Very funny.
Great comic.
So long ago that he was the middle act, and I was the headliner. We were this was like 84
Sure,
or something.
he was big in the
You know,
80s.
things that I'm sure the MC was the local disc jockey. It had progressed to that. It seems like it took a long time, but you know, the first couple of years, it was like, you know, oh, fuck, I got to go last again, you know, and he's on stage. We're in Savannah, Georgia, which now they would have no idea what he's talking about. But this is 1983 or 84. And I'm in the back, and I'm drunk, and there's, you know, X amount of people in there, and it's a small club, and Rich Jenny is on stage, and he's talking about Jewish people.
In Savannah, Georgia.
And I mean, he might as well have been speaking Greek. And I wasn't that far away from him, because it's a small club. He was right over there. And I'm on a stool in the back, and I'm screaming. I'm just screaming, and the sweat, and it was just like, because it wasn't like, well, let me go to something else. You didn't have that much material back then. He was still pretty new, and he's going on and on. It's a true story. What again? Nobody would have to ever believe it. Out of frustration, I can still see him. He puts his hand up here and he goes, "Do any of you people know what a bagel is?" And the guy in the corner goes, "Yeah. It's a hunting dog." And I mean, I screamed. But the guy, I swear to you, in my opinion, the guy was not being funny.
No, he was not.
He was not being funny. And it was like, Jenny told me he told that on Leno. I don't know whether he did or didn't, but that's one of the great stories. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Great, you know, and comics laughing at other comics bombing. It was just
Yes.
so many stories like that. You know?
So I'm gonna move ahead, and we're gonna get to Stern, because you were not only an on-air personality with Stern, everybody remembers who you were, but now you're writing, and you're writing rapidly. So this is what I want to get to, is like I asked you before, were you used to write? You're used to just memorizing jokes. When do you start writing? When does that happen?
Radio was not in my sights. You know, if you look at my life and go, you know, people say, "Oh, did you hear Jackie's podcast? He's so old, in love with himself." All I do is answer the questions. Right. You know, you're asking me, I'm telling you.
Right.
If you took my life and connect the dots backwards, it looks like I absolutely knew I'd do this, and that would lead to this, and that would lead to this. And meanwhile, my life has been a pinball game. Bing, 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 bing. Everything's so happenstance. You know, what if, what if Legman didn't write back? What if Rodney didn't write back? What if Howard didn't respond? But they did.
Right.
You know.
So what did you wrote to Howard? Is that how it worked?
When I started doing comedy, I was telling old jokes, and I told my girlfriend, I said, you know, they laugh at everything I say. I should make an album. She said, so make an album.
Nice.
So I set up microphones at Cinnamon. There's no comedy club.
Right.
This is in a barroom,
Right.
a restaurant, and recorded an album on a cassette player
Nice.
with the audience mics going into the right and my mic going into the left. And my buddies at the studio put an XLR out from my microphone amp, which
cassette
was
player.
a Fender guitar amplifier, split going into the left side. And I took home the cassette and mixed it onto reel-to-reel, chopped it up, borrowed $100 from 15 different people, and sent the master tape and the pictures to Nashville. And I'll tell you, when I went to pick up that 1,000 albums at Port Authority, you would have thought I was picking up quintuplets. I was like, I get euphoric now thinking about it. So, cut to 2 years later, a little bit more than 2 years later, I got 3 albums. Homemade albums, record them, cut them up. You know, when I was recording my second album at the East Side Comedy Club, I had the microphone set up, and Murphy came up and he said, Jack, you making another album? And I said, yeah. He said, Jack, I want to have an album. I said, I'd like to help you, Eddie, but I'm too busy. Which is a classic. So by 1982, I have 3 albums, and me and Nancy are sending them to everybody.
Okay.
If I ran into you and you said, I'm an actor, oh, Russ, give me your card. Let me send you my... Right. Not knowing if you'll ever be able to help me, if you'll even open it, well...
Right.
Who cares? And I mean, we're throwing crap against the wall. The classic.
Yeah.
And so I worked at this place, Garvin's, in Washington, D.C., and the owner said, hey, listen, there's a guy that used to do broadcasts in his underwear on Friday mornings from the club, and he just got fired here at D.C., and he's going to WNBC in New York. You should look him up. 3 albums, matching cassettes, all the promo, Howard Stern, care of WNBC. I never heard of the guy.
Right.
No idea, nothing. But he's one of the many guys, many people that...
Got that package.
And he also went on to the... And, you know, we had people Rolodex, and we had business. He was on our business Rolodex. So many of those people never entered our lives again. And one day Nancy called up and said, hey, that guy Howard Stern's on the phone. I want you to call him. And I called up. It had been a couple months. You know, he got to New York and got settled. And he said, hey, listen, we listen to your albums and you know every joke. You want to come hang out on the air? I said, sure. So I drove into Manhattan and he had 30 Rock and let him in. And Carson, you know, like, whoa. And I walked in. It was Howard and Robin and Fred and me. And we laughed for 4 hours.
That's fantastic.
And at the end of the day, he said, you know what, you're a lot of fun. Why don't you come back next week? So I came back once a week for 3 years for free.
Really?
And I have an idea and like pass it to him. And at first he was a little skittish about it. And slowly but surely, I was giving him ideas. And then he got fired.
Yeah,
and then
NBC,
he went
right.
to
K-Rock.
K-Rock.
Right.
And I was still on one day a week. And slowly but surely, I was, you know, giving him ideas. But when we went to K-Rock, it was a different setup. And it was actually a place for me to put my ideas. And then he called up and said, listen, we're going to mornings. You know, they're putting us on mornings. I want a price for 2 days a week.
Yeah, so that's getting up at like...
My total job description for 18 years, we're going to mornings. I want you to come on twice a week and do your thing with the notes. That was my job description. That was the total thing. Do your thing with the notes. Because I got to the point where I was writing things down and putting them on. He had like a, you know, like a loose leaf. And he'd have the copy for the commercials and a blank and put a note there. And within a month, or maybe 2 months, I went from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 days a week because he was funnier when I was there. And it's not that I'm a genius or he's not a genius.
Right.
The point is, with a little wind in your back,
Yeah.
you're a little bit faster sprinter. You know?
Yeah, and there's it's the chemistry, but it's also what are you doing that is how are you doing it so quickly? Is it just you just things are occurring as things are happening? You're writing it down, kind of.
It's
because you hadn't done that before,
you,
right?
And that it was totally
Totally no TV.
It was necessity is the mother of invention.
Right,
Like,
right.
you know, I wanted in.
Right.
It wasn't my place to talk and be funny, because if I had talked out and was funny, I wouldn't have been there long.
Right.
You know, nothing against him. It's his show.
That's the way it is, yeah.
And I had a great laugh.
You did.
And I was fun.
Yes.
So it was worth having me there. And they liked to pick on me. And the fact that they could pick on me and I had a good laugh was just about enough to justify me being in the room.
Right, right.
Okay?
Right.
So it's not like, why is that guy sitting there? You know, he's the foil.
Right.
But imagine we're out to lunch. You and Eddie and me.
Right.
You say something, he says something, I say something. I'm a funny guy, you're a funny guy, he's funny. It's an animated conversation. Instead, we're at lunch and we're having this animated conversation. If I think of something funny to say, instead of saying it, I write it down and put it in front of you, and you say it.
Right. Got it.
So you have your sense of humor and my
yours,
sense
right.
of humor. And meanwhile, I can think about what's going on. You're driving the bus, I can read the map. You can't drive the bus and read the map at the same time.
Right, right.
So I can think ahead a little bit. And I don't know exactly. I guess I'm real fast.
Clearly.
But I don't know that. Once again, here we are. Is the fish know it's in water?
Yeah, somebody else
You know,
knows.
I know the next thing I'm going to think of. But not only did you have to think, you had to think of it and write it down and get it in front of them.
Right.
Comedy moves fast.
Exactly.
You know.
Yeah.
But sometimes I get something. By the time I got up there, we'd be past it.
You'd be
But if it was
past it.
funny enough, he'd circle around and come back.
Right, right.
He would take something I wrote about Fred and make it about me, or if it's something about Gary, he would switch it and make it about Fred. You know.
Right.
Or he'd switch things. You know, the guy is absolutely brilliant, and I would
Right.
never take anything when people say, "Oh, well, you know, you were the whole sense of you." No, I wasn't.
no, yeah.
You know, because I come home, my wife would say, "Yeah, the funniest joke you wrote today was such and such." I said, "Well, I didn't write that. He said that on his own." She said, "But you laughed so hard." I said,
Because it was funny.
"Because it's funny. My job is to laugh when something's funny."
And I'll tell
I
you-
laugh really hard at what I write because I wouldn't have written it if I didn't think it was funny.
And that's a tough gig when they switch you to mornings, because you know you got to get up at what, fucking 2 a.m. or something to do that. Jesus Christ.
You know,
That's
in
hard
my
to be
entire
funny.
life, I wrote in my book, I said, in my entire life, I think I got up twice at 4 o'clock. Once to go fishing and once to take a ride back from Saratoga with my buddy's parents.
Right.
I mean, I could remember. And all of a sudden, here we are getting up at 4:30 every morning. And after, you know, how old am I? I'm like 35 years old. 35 years of going to bed at 5 o'clock in the morning. You know,
right.
You know, 3 Mary Tyler Moores and 2 Bob Newharts. The comedians used to say, "Here's Lucy," was God's way of telling comedians to go to bed. You know,
Yeah, once they got to the Lucy show, and it wasn't even I Love Lucy anymore, you knew the
You were
reruns
done.
were, yeah,
You were
it's
done.
over.
But it just worked.
Did you enjoy it? Did you have a great time on it when you were really cooking, or was it
I had
just
as
hard?
good a time the last day as the first day.
Oh,
The
that's
hours were impossible.
Right.
Behind the scenes, I was treated horribly. You know, people say, "How could you make all that much money?" But it's subtle.
Sure.
You know, you'd have to know.
Right.
You know, I was going back over some stuff that I completely forgot. I looked at some of my old contracts and things that went down. You know, where you make agreement on the contract, and okay, and then they give you the contract to sign, and this isn't what you agreed to. You know.
Yeah, right.
And I, you're gonna make trouble? Right. Oh, you're making trouble again? Right. Oh, you again with the trouble? You know.
Yeah.
So, but
Well, you know
but
what's-
all in all, it was spectacular.
Yeah. I was talking to another buddy of mine, a musician, and the one little thing we have in common that has anything to do with Howard Stern or anything is I went to school with stuttering John Melendez.
Massapequa High.
Plainedge High School.
Plainedge
He
High
was a
School.
couple of years ahead of us, and he was actually this musician I was talking to. He was his guitar teacher. And that guy, he was always a nutbag, you know, and a really nice guy and metalhead back as a kid. But I remember when he was on that show, we were like, how the fuck did stuttering John and then he went on to become I mean, Howard had all these characters that you're like, how did that guy get on?
Well, Gary walked in and said, "Howard, there's a guy here who wants to intern on the show. He has a stutter." And Howard said, "To hire him." He didn't even say, "I want to meet him." He said, "Hire him." You know, and he was that brilliant. You know,
Yeah.
it was
There's a lot of characters. I mean, it's so many people walked in and out of that world. You must have had material for days.
It was so interesting. You know.
Did you pick up new jokes and stuff just from that? Like, the same way you got the book from the French guy.
No, nobody was all that funny.
No,
They really weren't. And in all those years, I don't think I gave Howard 2 jokes. I mean, they were all lines. They were lines and concepts and all kinds of here and there, and unless we wrote like a Sternak or something like that, which was jokes, or we wrote a bit. We did a thing called Sternak, which was Carson's Karnak.
Right, yes.
Where he held the envelope up, and they'd be as dirty as they could get. and I made Johnny Carson fall off his chair, which is one of my claims to fame.
Really? Tell that story. I want to hear this. How did that happen?
They invited me and Nancy to go out to the season premiere of Sex and the City.
Okay.
And I said, well, we're in New York. This is Hollywood. They said, no, we'll fly out, first class, put you up. Just don't tell anybody. Because they knew if we talk about it on the Stern Show, it's worth gold.
Right.
So we go out and we go to the premiere, and it was really exciting. And it's funny because the lead guy, Michael, I'll never think of his name. No, Michael, the creator or the producer, whatever, had been in a guy and girl group in Philadelphia when I started out.
Oh, is that right?
Him, and you know who Dom Herrera is?
Yeah.
Well, Dom Herrera's wife, Lisa Mendez, and this guy, Michael. How could I not know his name?
We'll pull it up somewhere.
They were a 2-man group. I had so much fun. I was in Philadelphia for 4 years before the Stern Show. Forget being in Philadelphia before I ever met Howard.
Right.
I was having fun in Philadelphia. It was insane fun. The guy John DeBella that we wound up going to battle with, I knew from LIR on Long Island in the 70s. I mean, you live long enough, things go wild. So, what the hell are we talking about?
You go out to L.A. for Sex and the City.
So, somebody says, you want to go to a party? A bunch of writers going to a party. Writers, producers, real Hollywood party. And I was like, wow, that's a new thing to me. I'd love that. So we go to this Hollywood party, and there's lots of people that and then slowly but surely they find out who you are, and who they are, and it was really fun.
Sure.
Inside fun, funny people that can tell a joke, tell a story.
Right.
This guy Tony DeSena comes over to me. He says, Jackie, I got a story that I know you'll love. He said, I was a writer on the Carson show for the last couple of years before he quit. And, but I stayed friends, and we go to lunch once in a while. I'm pretty sure at this point I don't know what years, but I think Carson was still alive. I don't remember.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think he died in the early 2000s. Sex and the City was early 2000s.
But that doesn't have anything really to do. So what happened was we used to do this thing called Sternak.
Right.
Where Howard was Sternak, which was Karnak, with the thing and
envelope.
The music, and he'd hold up the envelope, and he'd say the answer, and then he'd open up the question.
Right.
And there was a guy that used to come in, not all the time, but usually when we did the thing. This guy Al Rosenberg, a very, very funny guy. He used to work with Imus, used to work on Fox. A very funny guy, dear guy. He was one of the writers with us on Channel 9 show. I still love the guy. And he would come in and play Ed McMad, M-A-D.
Right.
Ed McMad. Right. And from the minute, here's Stern. Hi, Stern. Way overdone.
Right.
How are you, Ed? It was ridiculous.
Right.
Ridiculously lampooning. But somebody must have turned on the Stern Show or heard it and said, and now here's Ed McMahon. And called Johnny. Said, Johnny.
That's great.
Ed's on the Howard Stern Show? So Johnny calls up Tony DeSena. He says, Johnny called me and said, Tony, what's this? I know you're a fan of that Stern Show. Ed was on the Howard Stern Show? He goes, no, John, they do a thing, their imitation of Karnak, and they have this guy on that plays Ed McMahon, and he laughs like Ed. He's going, oh, Sternak, huh? Is it funny? He goes, well, yeah, it could be funny. He said, this guy Jackie Martling writes them, and I wrote them all. I wrote all the Sternaks and all the insults, so I got the full blame.
Right, of course, yeah.
The tiny bit of credit, but the full blame.
Plausible deniability.
If it's so. So I worked hard on them, and they were usually pretty pretty interesting. And as borderline filthy as you could get, but people forget. People say, "You're coming over my house, don't curse." I'm like, we were on terrestrial radio for 15 years.
That's right.
People forget
Right. Right.
that it
You
had
gotta
to be clean, because now it's serious, right? So he goes, "Well, it's funny." Well, this guy Jackie Martling writes him. He says, "And it's funny." He said, "It can be very funny." And Carson said, "Well, give me an example." And at the time, this movie was in the theaters. And he said, "Okay, the answer is Eyes Wide Shut." Eyes Wide Shut. And the question was, how would a black man tell you his name was wide shut? He said, Carson went nuts.
Oh,
He's
my
like,
God.
which is just so horrible, but so funny and
Right.
so stupid. And Carson said, "Well, it's pretty funny, Tony." You know, he said, "Hey, Jackie, I knew you would love to hear that story." Isn't that a great story?
It is a great story, and that segues perfect into what I want to get into now, which is that's a joke of its time. When you look around now, is comedy taking a hit on some of this woke
you know what?
snowflake social media social justice stuff?
I still, no, I'll hit a Polish joke, a Jewish joke, a black joke here and there, but less and less because marriage jokes, poop jokes, they hold up, and they're plenty.
Right.
You know, I wound up, now, I tell jokes now that two Polish guys did this, just two guys did this.
Right.
It's just as
It's the
funny
same
because
thing.
people are stupid, and, you know, in general. And just like Henny Youngman, you know, when you're a kid, Henny Youngman isn't that funny. But once you get married or have a girlfriend and time moves on, Henny Youngman gets funnier and funnier and funnier because it's reality. It's just like the honeymooners getting funnier. And it's still fun, you know, to tell a Polish joke, or you make it into a blonde joke, or, you know, a cheap Jew joke, whatever. I don't let it cut my balls off.
Right.
But I never was all that horrible.
Right.
You know, like I never used real bad, like black slurs or Jewish slurs or Italian slurs. I didn't use those killer words.
Right.
Never. You know, the black guy did this, the Jewish guy did this.
Right.
I did in the very beginning used to say Polak, and I didn't realize that Polak was like, in essence, like kike or wop or something like that, which I didn't see that. And once somebody told me, I was like, well,
all right,
there's no skin off my ass, you know, like, because my job is not to insult.
Right.
My job is to make you laugh.
Right.
You know,
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because the thing that we do that's similar is, you know, the actor and you're trying to reflect something truthful to the audience that they recognize in themselves. So if you're going to put walls around that and be, well, you can't do that, or you can't. It's.
But what you got to do is nobody tells you don't do this or do this.
Right.
You do it yourself.
Right.
You know, before anybody can say, you know, don't jump off that cliff. Just take a few steps back and you don't jump.
Maybe
off the
think
cliff.
about it first. Yeah.
You know, but it is interesting. But you know, and people get upset with me. You know, that joke's offensive to women, or that joke's offensive. Listen, it's called a punchline.
Right.
Somebody's getting hurt. I'm sorry. That's my job. You know, don't come in.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
I insult your wife. I insult your marriage. Who cares? Everybody's got a wife. Everybody's got a marriage.
Right. Could Rickles exist? You know, I mean, it's a different world.
You know, I don't know.
It's not the same place.
30 years later, he was doing the exact same
act.
You know,
right.
Look at this Nazi bastard.
Right.
You know, we're laughing because you're a little stubby Jew. You know.
Yeah. Right.
So you know.
Well, the other thing I want to talk about too is you say you go to this party in the height of this fame. Is this the first real, like, where you really, are people recognizing you, or like, what's vibe like?
When I first, it's so funny because people say, are you popular in your town? I was a loudmouth from the word go. So Oyster Bay, everybody in Oyster Bay and East Norwich, they knew me already.
Right.
You know, it wasn't like, you know, most of the people in Oyster Bay, they didn't listen to the Stern Show or watch the Stern Show.
Right.
And then somebody would watch it and say, hey, he says you're an angry, cheap old man. And I'm like, you know, and meanwhile, I'm the most generous guy, and I'm the guy that's got everybody laughing for the last 50 years. And they're like, what the hell is he talking about? You know? But it was interesting how it got to a point where in the beginning, people didn't even know Robin was black. You
That's
know,
right.
they had no idea
That's
I was
right.
writing. To this day, there's people that had no idea I was writing. It's funny what they know and what they don't know. But we started on the E channel, which was
Right.
snippets of the show on television.
Right.
And the first time, you know, there's always light bulb moments.
Right.
You know, where, whoa. And the ASPCA of New Orleans brought me down there to do a show. I was on with Steppenwolf and Leon Russell, and I was in the middle. Riverwalk, 5,000 people. That was incredible.
Right.
But they didn't have to know who the hell I was. But they went wild because it was Stern Show. But me and Nancy went to Bourbon Street and to get something to eat. And we went to a restaurant, went upstairs, and we're in a wrought iron table looking down over Bourbon Street. And absolutely nonchalantly, the waiter came over the table and said, "Hi, Jackie. Hi, Nancy."
Wow.
And it hit, like, not only did this guy know who I was and felt like he was our friend, he knew us.
Wow. Wow.
They knew, and I was like, wow. You know, it's one thing, you know, but they, you know, it's a double-edged sword. One of my favorite stories, there's a Howard Johnson's in East Norwich. And down the street from East Norwich is Westbury Music Fair.
Right.
And right next to Howard Johnson's was Burt Bacharach Motorin. So a lot of times, you know, I remember my mother said Bob Hope went walking past the house the other night. And we're like, oh boy, Mom's losing it. It turns out Bob Hope was at Westbury Music Fair and he's staying at Burt Bacharach and he's walking his dog. And she waved, "Hi, Bob." You know, we thought she's out of her mind. Right. And then my sister came home drunk one night late and there was Bob Hope walking. Oh, maybe Mom's not crazy. So you never knew who was at Westbury or whatever. And this is just after the same thing where we're just getting to where people knew us, you know. And me and Nancy was sitting there having something to eat at a two-top, you know, in Howard Johnson's. And from over my shoulder, a woman comes over and taps me on the shoulder and she was right in my face. It was so great. She says, "Can I ask you who you are?" And I was like, "Jackie Martling." And she goes, "It's not him!" I'm telling you, my ex-wife is still laughing at that. She roared.
That's when you know the height of fame is when
that was the greatest. Like, not so fast, my friend. Not so fast.
You thought you were special.
But I mean, right in my ass. Not him. Oh God.
Now you got a book out now. It's you wrote joke books, but this one is your autobiography.
This is The Jokeman, Bow to Stern, and you can't Google Bow to Stern, because if you Google that, you get a 7th grade sailing manual. But it's The Jokeman, Bow to Stern, and it's available on Amazon, but it's available on Kindle and on Audible. And people love that because it's
you reading it,
back
right?
on the on the radio.
Great. That's awesome.
And for the most part, people love it. I got so many great reviews. Of course, there's a couple of people. This is the worst book.
Well,
you can tell they never read it. Right. You know, the Howard people. And a year or two ago, I don't remember the timing, but I got a big bump in sales. And my rep from the book agent called up and said, "What'd you do?" Because I do a lot of podcasts and a lot of interviews, and I love talking about the book, and you know, but never more than any more. You know, I'll do 2 this week and none next week and 3. You know, he said, "But you got a big bump," and I said, "I have no idea what happened. I'd always put it on my website. I always put it in my mailing." What had happened was Howard put out another book.
Oh,
and was on Amazon. He never told his audience that Jackie had a book. They had no idea I had a book. And all of a sudden, Howard Stern's book, and underneath, people who bought this also ordered. And there's Jackie's book and John's book and Artie's book. They already have their credit card there. They already have the mouse there. Just by clicking. For another $15, they get Jackie's book. And
thank God for those artificial intelligence algorithms that just stick you in there with that.
And I wonder if he knows that. I mean, I don't know if it sold 10 extra books or 1,000 extra books, but it was enough that the guy called me up and said, "Holy Christ!"
Now, when did you decide that I'm going to put all this stuff down? And did you literally write all this shit out?
I've been doing my first. Well, I wrote a book in the 70s you remember John F. Kennedy
Obviously.
wrote a book called Profiles in Courage.
Right, right.
So in the late 70s, my book was Profiles in Discourage. And I told some of the stories from my childhood, and I remember one of my buddies said, this is a great book. It's not going anywhere till you get famous, but once you're famous, it might be all right. And then I started toying around in the mid-90s. Rory Rosegarten was my manager. He's the guy who had Roy Romano and made Ray Romano and made $1 gazillion. Still a very, very close friend. He said, Mel Berger at William Morris thinks, you should write a book. I'm like, and the opening of the forward was, I'm sitting in a luncheonette here at JFK waiting for Gilbert Gottfried. We're flying to Las Vegas to do a 20-minute section of a TV show. And they sent me the script, and there's two guys in the script. They failed to tell me which of the two guys I was playing. But Mel Berger, one of the top guys at William Morris, thinks I could have a book, so stay tuned. And then there was no sense staying tuned.
Yeah, right.
But slowly but surely, I had written down stories. I'd write down a story, and I'd put it on my website. And some of my stories I loved so much, and I'd write them. A lot of my original stories aren't in my book. When I wrote the book, I had twice as much as I needed.
Wow.
Twice as much. So I had to do Sophie's Choice and say, this goes in,
Right,
this doesn't, this goes in. This. And now I read the ones, like the chapter about making private parts is not in my book.
Okay.
I'm like, and this was a chapter that showed them treating me badly, paying me poorly, not giving me credit, not, like they conveniently made the movies, so I wasn't there. I was barely there when the they had to create it. So the last thing they were going to do was have people see me passing a joke.
Notes
But I was thrilled to be in it. It was the most fun I ever had in my life. But I had amassed those stories over the years, and I loved them all. And over the years, I would send them to my friends. What do you think of this? Oh, that's great. It's going to be great. And then I tried to get a deal and couldn't get one. Tried to get a deal and couldn't get one. Tried to get a deal and couldn't. And I was banging my head against the wall. But I remembered in the late 70s, I banged my head against the wall for so long trying to get them to put out a joke book. And finally, they put out my joke book, and it all went away. All the door knocking, all that stuff melted away. I asked for a joke book, and I got a joke book.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes,
So,
yeah.
and then this girl that was very, very good friend, and she said, this guy's interested. And I said, listen, I got a couple other people going. I don't need him. And then they fell through, and I said, listen, ask Peter if he still thinks he can get me a deal. And she goes, yes, he's interested. And I go to lunch with this guy, and this has nothing to do with anything. But I had my 516-922 wine joke line since 1979, since Cinnamon. Still going.
Crazy.
This guy, this book agent, when he was a little kid, when you're a little kid, there's things that happen at different ages.
Right.
And the first time he became aware there was such thing as a phone, there was a phone, but he didn't have anybody to call. And I don't know whether, I got to go back and get, whether his father had a sticker or whatever it was. The first phone call he ever made in his life was the 516-922. And here he is, and he got me a book deal.
That's incredible.
And he said, he's the guy who called me and said, hey, Stern gave you a bump without knowing it.
That's a
great... you know. But, and...
how long did it take you to write?
I already had it, and then I went through, I had a guy help me choose what chapters, and... but all the editing, all the writing, nobody smoothed it over or changed anything, And, I don't care if people believe it, don't believe it, Like when somebody says, Jackie obviously had a ghostwriter, that's flattering to me.
Right. Yeah, sure.
But
do you like
I'm
it?
Smart, I'm not stupid, and it's a little funny and a little witty. But one thing, and everybody's not sold on this, but every syllable is true.
Right.
There is nothing that isn't the way it. If any of it is wrong, it's only because maybe my memory is not perfect.
Well, it's
but
pretty
it's
close.
nothing. Yeah, if I didn't have a blue car, I had a red car.
Right, that kind of a thing. Well, before I'm going to do one last bit on this, and then I want to get into how we met, and we'll wrap it up in a bit. But the writing, did you like doing that? Was it fun to have to go through all this shit and put it
They
down?
made a documentary on me that's not out yet, and I was talking about when you write a story that happened to you in your life, and you get done with it, it is more euphoric than anything in the world. And I can't believe I don't sit down and do it more. But I've got so much.
Why is that? Why is it?
It's just getting it out. And when you sit down and start writing, that it spurs it. It's just like talking. You're talking to somebody. I always sound like I'm making up stuff as I go along because it makes you think of something else, and it makes you think of something else. But the things that really happen, I can't tell you how many times in the last 5 years I've gone, I can't believe it. That didn't make it into my book or into my notes. Because it's funny, silly, crazy stuff.
There's an element of probably like sense memory of nostalgia that comes back, and you're back there in Nashville, you're back there in D.C. or whatever.
I'll try and make this quick. So we're talking about Florida, and you say, well, what was it like? Was there camaraderie, or was it was the headline, or blah, blah, blah? And I said, no. In the old days, it was always just 3 comics or just 4 comics. And I never was in any arguments about who goes when, because, with a small crowd, you don't want to be, I went last. I didn't have a choice, so I wasn't part of that discussion. I was loud, I was last. And we're at Fort Lauderdale at the comic strip, and it's Saturday night, and they said, Martling, this girl invited us all to a party. We're not going to sit here and spend 40 minutes watching you tell your dick jokes. We're going to the party, and you can get a cab. And I'm like, I understand this. It's fine. 10 years ago, I'm doing a golf outing in Nissaquag for a Carol M. Baldwin Cancer Fund.
Okay.
I play golf with them, with Cooney and all these guys, and Alec Baldwin.
The Baldwins, right. All the Long Island guys.
Either Alec or Billy or Steven each year would show up. And, the last words Alec Baldwin ever said to me were, "You are so fucking funny," which still resonates in my head. So we're doing this outing, and we're having putting contests before, and there's a bunch of guys standing around telling stories. And this guy says, "Jackie, come here. I think you want to hear this." So I go over, and this guy says, "So, decades ago, I'm living in Fort Lauderdale, working as a cab driver. And I get a call to pick up a guy at the comic strip in Fort Lauderdale. I go and pick up this guy. He gives me the address. He's going to a party. He says, we get to the party. Oh, he says, when he came out and got in the cab, he gave me an album. I drove him to the party. He insisted that I go in. I went in, had some drinks,
The cab
got
driver.
stoned, got laid, had a great time, went home, loved the album, called the number on the album. For bookings, call. It was my home phone number. He says, and I called the number. This almost makes me cry.
God.
He's like, called the number. And this woman answered the phone. And it was the most enchanting 45-minute phone call I've ever had. This woman was brilliant and hysterical. My mother's sitting there alone. She got a phone call out of the blue.
God. Wow. That's great.
And that's the story of
Yeah.
everybody gets an album. And
Right.
here it is years later. This guy's you probably know his name. He's an electrical contractor on the South Shore.
Wow.
On the East End, who
That's
is a
incredible.
gazillionaire. I'm like, what a...
Yeah, I mean,
Who could make that up?
no, that's incredible.
And I loved hearing it,
Yeah.
and it means nothing to anyone, but it's
yeah.
it tells the tale.
Yes, absolutely.
Everybody gets an album,
Yep.
share the wealth, come
Right.
in, get drunk. I'm sure I told them jokes on the way. I'm sure I'm half in the bag from the show,
Right. That's fantastic.
That great.
All right, so last little bit, just how you and I met. We met doing a little low-budget picture where we were actors. Now, as an actor, were you ever were you doing that before? Was that one of your first things?
I'll tell you one thing about you. When I first heard of this Fred Carpenter guy, he must have sent me one of his movies.
Okay, yeah, right.
And there was this nasty motherfucker in this movie that was so vicious that I really couldn't believe it. And then I met you, and it was you. And I'm telling you, I'm still trying to. Those images are still clashing in my mind.
Right.
I always wanted to be an actor. I wasn't any good at it, but at some point, I took acting lessons. I actually took acting lessons with a guy named Tom Waits, who's not Tom Waits, the guitar player. Right. Thomas Waits. He got Al Pacino to do American Buffalo on stage in New York, and I guess he played the young guy, and he must have been on fire, and I don't know what he did, but he did something to, like Jackie Mason giving Ed Sullivan the finger. He did something to shoot himself in the foot, because here it is decades later. He was the guy in And Justice for All. I don't know if you remember.
Right. I remember the
There
film.
was a guy who the cops picked up who had a very generic name, like Tom Williams, who had murdered somebody.
Okay.
But it wasn't him.
Okay,
It was a
right.
different Tom Williams.
Right.
But they took him to jail and locked him up, and he freaked out, and they wound up shooting him and killing him.
Right,
and
right.
it was a great role.
Great scene, yeah.
But then he wasn't heard of for millions of years.
And he was your acting teacher.
And he just, I was making a movie for Ken Del Vecchio.
Oh, I know that name.
Yeah, same category as Fred.
Yep.
And this guy, Tom Waits, said, you mind if I give you some pointers?
Okay.
And I said, I would love that.
Yeah.
And he gave me a few. It's almost like telling a guy holding the golf club, no, don't hold the head,
right.
hold the handle.
Right.
When you're that new,
Right.
a little bit goes a long way.
Right.
And he said, you should come do acting classes. And I did his acting classes for a year or 2 or 3, and I really, really loved it.
Sure.
And it was like, my apartment's on 56th and 8th, and his studio was like 23rd and Lex, but I'd take the subway down and go to his acting class, but then I would walk all the way back, which was my reward,
Right.
so I could go to Junior's and stuff myself full of fried chicken because I had walked it off.
Right.
But then when I got offered the show on Sirius to do Jackie's Joke Hunt,
Right.
my own show on Sirius,
Yep.
the only slot that was open was Tuesday, 7 p.m.
Right.
And my acting class was Tuesday, 7 p.m. And that was the end of the acting
Right.
class.
Right after we did the mob picture that we did together, you had me on. We did the Jackie's Joke Hunt there.
Oh, you did that?
Yeah, I
That's
think I did
great.
that show with you.
A
Yeah,
million
that
people
was,
did-
that was a
you
lot
know-
of fun. That was fun.
We really, really loved doing it.
Everybody get a joke. You'd pass a joke around, and everybody do a joke.
402 shows we did.
That's great.
So crazy. But I loved acting. I loved...
Do you still do it? You still going out there doing it?
If I just, I had a role a month or two ago, we did this mob thing called Almost Made, and I improvised my own line, and it's something that I know is going to bury my girlfriend because it's something I'm always saying around the house, but I haven't told her yet, and I've been biting my lip forever because I wanted to see it for the first
sure,
time.
Absolutely.
But that was real weird, with the COVID and the mess and blah, 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 blah. But it was, the same 8 Italian guys, Paul Borghese and
Right.
and Lou Veneria. You saw the Irishman?
Yes, right.
Lou Veneria was the guy with the pink hair.
Yeah, right.
And we had a great time.
That's good.
But it's rare I do these things. I had a shot on Leverage a million years ago, and I had a shot on some cop show with David, whatever his name was.
Well, I thought you were great in the thing we did. That was my first time meeting you, and didn't know that you acted it. But the scene was great. You played you were a little drunk in the scene with me, and it was great.
I
It was a
appreciate
great
that.
bit. It was a really awesome job.
I thought that, but I just, when I do it, I do okay. That thing with Vinnie Pastore was so funny because that girl wrote, I guess it's a short film, and I guess it's an Italian thing. You want to sell your house, you bury St. Joseph upside down. I don't know any of this crap, But, nobody's paying attention to this movie, and Vinnie Pastore shows up, and I'm like a clown. I work as a clown, and I'm going to buy this house. So I got on this crazy suit with a big flower that squirts. And he comes walking up, and I squeeze the thing, and I got a picture of him being hit in the eye with the water. And I said to the girl, put this on Instagram
Absolutely.
and put squirting pussy. I said the entire world will pass that around because everybody knows he's big
He's
pussy.
big pussy
and he's
for the-
squirting pussy. Come on, squirting pussy, such a perfect
Yeah.
double
that's-
entendre. You know.
And it'll come up in a search real fast.
Unbelievable. And disappoint a few people.
Yeah, exactly. No kidding. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up here. So, because what we talked about, what the thing about everybody I talk to like you is, like I said before, there's a talent, but then there's the guy who goes, fuck it, I'm going to write him a letter. Fuck it, I'm going to call the fuck it. What is it about that, and what advice could you give to the young, whatever, comedian, actor? What is it about the tenacity of this business that you need to know?
Nothing except that is 99% of it.
That's
You know, when you first start doing this, first get any kind of fame, people ask the same questions. You know, were you the class clown, blah, 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 blah. And very often people come up and say, I want to be a comedian. What should I do? And you get asked that a lot. And pretty soon, but pretty early on, people would ask me that, and I'd say, quit. They said, what do you mean? I said, forget it. It's too crazy. You don't want to do that. Which sounds rude. And it ain't. Because if you say to me you want to be a comedian, and me saying don't do it is enough to stop you,
right.
you are not cut out for this, okay? So, meanwhile, I saw somebody ask Sean Young the same thing at the Gold Coast Film Festivals, and she said that she did the same thing. I saw Cindy Adams, Matt Damon said, people tell me they want to be an actor. I say, forget it.
Forget it.
You know, there's no guarantee of anything. It's not, because if that slows them down, they're not cut out for this. So I'm like, well, great minds, right? So Jimmy Fallon calls up the Stern Show, 1998 or whatever.
Wow.
Hey, Howard. Hey, Jimmy, you never been on the show, but I'm a big fan. Nice to talk to you. He's promoting Almost Famous, the movie. He goes, yeah, well, we almost met years ago. He goes, really? He says, yeah. I live outside of Albany. And you decided you were going to run for governor, and you and all the guys piled into a couple buses and came up to Albany to make a speech
Campaign.
or whatever. And I figured I wanted to meet you guys, so I found out what hotel you were in. And I went to the hotel bar. And, of course, Jackie was standing at the bar. I went up to him and I said, I want to be a comedian. And he told me to quit. So, of course, I never heard the end of it. I never got to explain my rationale, which
Right.
makes perfect sense. And this is before I'd read Matt Damon doing it. And, you know, so funny. And then I would run into Fallon here and there. And he'd say, Jackie, that's my favorite story. You got to come on the show. And it really would have worked before the Tonight Show. When he had the Late Show,
Sure.
you didn't have to be
Right. Super
Steve
squeaky.
McQueen.
Yeah,
I could have
right.
gone on, and,
Right.
and it's a funny story.
Right.
And it makes me look like a jerk, not him.
But it's also, I mean, that's the whole thing. That's the whole truth behind it is, you know, if you can't hack it,
Right.
if you think you can't hack it, that's probably the first step in not doing
it's
it.
tenacity, you know.
So, Jack, I'm going to wrap it up. Where just for anybody listening and watching, God willing, people listening and watching, where's your website? Where should you find you? Where's your book? Everything. Plug it all.
Messages like happy birthday, congratulations on your divorce, how you doing? I hope you're enjoying COVID. It's cameo.com/Jackie Martling, and I do 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever,
Right.
as dirty or as clean as you want, to just about any message. And if you go to the website, cameo.com/Jackie Martling, they have like 6 or 8 of the ones I've done already. And they're all loaded with jokes. So if you don't want to give me a nickel, just go to that website and listen to some of the old messages, and you'll get a bunch of pretty off-color jokes. But it's really fun, and I've got like 65-star reviews. People seem to love them. My website is jokeland.com. You can go there and find out that I'm not working because nobody is.
That's right.
I still have my joke line, 516 922-WINE, which is 516-922-9463. Dirty jokes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week since 1979.
That's incredible.
People say, wow, you must have got rich. It has cost me a fortune for 41 years.
Wow.
It's just like calling my home. And I have a book out, The Jokeman, Bow to Stern. If you go to JackieTheJokeman.com, the Amazon page pops up. Jackie the Jokeman, one word, JackieTheJokeman.com. It's hardcover, it's softcover, it's Audible, and it's also on Kindle. And we made a documentary, and it's coming to a film festival or a theater near you. Should we ever dig our way out of this pit that we have found ourselves in? It's called Jokeman, and it's funny. It's got Penn Jillette and Willie Nelson and Stuttering John and Billy West and my entire family and my beautiful girlfriend, and it's very interesting. And Willie Nelson is worth the price of admission.
Sure.
And I'm done promoting myself. And
Well.
I love Russ, and I wish you guys all the luck with this fantastic podcast.
Thank you, Jackie. I appreciate you giving me the time, man. It's the time is valuable, and you've given me more than enough. That
Once again, somebody invites you to come talk about themselves. It's like, what time can you get there?
Right. Thanks so much, Jackie. I appreciate it. Yeah.